Hello, you're about to watch 10 brand new ways to tackle the climate crisis, all suggestions by myself. And just to let you know, before you watch, this clip you're about to see, albeit a 30-minute clip, is taken from a much longer video that I've made on my channel, all about eco-activism, which contains lots of archive footage of activism, showing you exactly how it should be done, and then showing you how the modern age climate activism isn't really successful and needs a lot of work. Hence videos like this and that one. There's a section about how criticism of climate activism can instantly be dismissed. You can watch that separately in this video, which is another clip video. So I'm trying to give something for everyone here. You either are a fan of shorter videos, such as the activism one or the one you're about to see, or if you prefer, you should stop watching now and watch the entire stuff put all together with 45 minutes of extra content in the big long video about eco-activism, which should be available on my channel within 24 hours of this one being uploaded, and definitely in time for COP26, the climate summit, which is being held in Glasgow in November 2021. Other than that, please enjoy the clip video that you're about to watch now, and I'll see you on the other side. So we've reached the conclusion part of the video now. You've seen Mark Thomas and Matt Winning using their particular brand of activism or comedy or both to try and get a message across, to try and bring forth some kind of change. They make you think and hopefully you buck your ideas up from there, or they make other people think and they buck their ideas up. My contribution is of course to make this video featuring Matt Winning and Mark Thomas and also give my ideas of how possibly to improve eco-activism. And that's what this segment's all about. I wanted to call this segment Make Extinction Rebellion Great Again, but unfortunately the connotations associated with that particular phrase do make you think of a man who is the least environmentally friendly person we've ever seen. So instead I just call it What Next? I'm going to basically read out 10 different suggestions on a back of an envelope, because you know recycling is important, etc. And I'm basically going to run through them as quickly as I can. Things to make protests better, what policies you should focus on, various things like that. But some of them I might indulge in slightly. And basically this video is already about 45 minutes long, so I hope you don't mind me making it that little bit longer. Some of the things I won't be talking about, some of the things that didn't make the list, are Chinese embassies, protesting outside Chinese embassies, which is a good idea, and I'm not saying it shouldn't happen. And that's mainly there for the people who say, what about China? I mean, they're the biggest polluters. I mean, let's go after them. Why don't you go after them? Meanwhile, they're implying that everyone else doesn't really need to do anything about climate change. And why should I need to change when other people need to do it first? Is it basically what they're saying there? And it's not going to make the list, because if you do go and protest Chinese embassies and Chinese businesses and polluters and so forth, critics will still have a problem with that. They'll probably call people racist or something like that. And as I said earlier on in the video, there is no acceptable form of protest in these type of critics' eyes. So let's run through the 10 ideas. Number 1, use celebrities again, for fuck's sake. I mean, obviously the Emma Thompson thing I highlighted earlier, she was there at the first big Extinction Rebellion rally. That helped bring some focus towards their cause. And other celebrities have put their name towards the green cause. Since then, I've not seen one celebrity's name mentioned with Extinction Rebellion. Certainly none that stuck in my memory. There are plenty of celebrities lining up saying do something about climate change or become more green and stuff like that. One of the ones who's possibly not a great example is Leonardo DiCaprio, a man who hates the idea of climate change but is so rich he probably owns a couple of super yachts. It doesn't matter if all 25 houses that he probably owns are very well insulated. He has flown across the world quite a few times and therefore is instantly seen as a hypocrite. So choose people carefully. If you're a member of Insulate Britain, and as the newspapers have pointed out, you own about 5 different diesel vehicles, even though that has nothing to do with insulating houses, people still use that to knock you. And you can do without that kind of bad publicity. So choose your celebrities carefully. Get them involved. That will get people's attention. They will listen to those celebrities. It's so simple. You've done it before in the past and you don't do it anymore. Why not? I do not know. There's an activist group called Led by Donkeys who often put up billboards about the government here in the UK. They're eye-catching and make a point and do have some kind of impact. They often film people walking past those billboards going, what? And the penny drops about some kind of horrific fact about the government. They also are well known for projecting videos and images on buildings such as the Houses of Parliament, and to an extent that works, and joining that with Extinction Rebellion could make a bit of a difference, because normally led by donkeys, really just focuses on everyday politics rather than the environment. But things like this should be avoided. When I saw this, Boris Johnson is a wet wipe, I almost cringed myself to death. As I said at the start of this video, this is about the do's and don'ts of protesting, and this is a definite don't. Anything I raise in this part of the video is potentially something that activists could do, then I instantly distance myself from that activity. This is just a fun YouTube video by someone who isn't an activist, just a nobody. A channel with very few subscribers that really, let's face it, no one listens to. If suddenly someone does an idea that is featured in this video, I like to A, not take any credit for it, annoyingly, and B, distance myself massively from it. This is just entertainment. This isn't a call to arms, okay? Legally, I have to say that. Ugh. So that's why the third suggestion coming up does involve some protests, and which I do not endorse whatsoever. So we hear about crops failing across the world. Recently, there was a lot of problems in Canada because of a summer that was so hot. Basically, they run out of pasta. A disastrous growing season in Canada that has seen record temperatures and subsequent droughts, plus a cold springtime in Italy affecting the quality and quantity of Italian wheat, means that the two major suppliers of pasta are running very low indeed. And it's us consumers that are likely to pay more for pasta in the future as we foot the bill for rising wheat prices. You'll see from my suggestions that a lot of climate activists are aware of these problems, but don't focus on the specific parts of these problems that really would get people's attention. So, crops failing and there being less pasta, that's pretty bad, but something we can just about live with. Crops fail and there's maybe less wheat and barley, well, there's a little bit less bread in the world. It's becoming more serious. But what about the ingredients to make a certain product that grow in fields that people will miss quite dearly? For example, the ingredients to make beer. So far, the media have mostly focused on the taste of beer changing for the worse in the future and the potential for beer prices to rise in the future too. Both of these outcomes are due to the harvesting of hops being affected by increased rainfall, which of course is due to climate change. But Forbes.com write that in modelling the impact of the most severe climate-related events, a study suggests the amount of beer drunk would fall by 16% globally. In the UK alone, beer consumption will fall by 1.33 billion litres, with prices doubling as a result of barley losses. If protesters simply said, in the future, due to climate change, booze could become a thing of the past, and then back up that prediction with stats and facts and looking at the evidence involved, then my God, people will start to lose their shit almost immediately. And the protest part of this is possibly not exactly protesting outside breweries and distribution places for booze, lager, cider, etc. No, in fact, I think you should do something slightly different, and with permission, you should arrange a piss up in a brewery. Like one big massive party that all the media is invited to. Lay it on thick, give them free booze, which of course you pay for in advance. Get everyone a bit merry, but also make them aware of the situation. You can have a rave at the end, you can have a little dance, you can have a band there or something similar, but ultimately, as long as you get the message across before people are really pissed, and then you have a good old drink up afterwards. This idea is mainly stolen from the Adam and Joe show, because they once said, I wonder if we can actually organise a piss up in a brewery, and they went ahead and did it as part of a segment of their comedy show. And again, I'm no stranger to stealing ideas from the past, so I think that's a good way of highlighting the potential loss of beer in the future. / complete damaging of crops due to hot weather, which is due to climate change. The Environment Minister in the UK is George Eustice, who I like to call George Useless. Here's some information about him. Now, to be fair, despite George Useless being the Secretary of State for the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, he isn't solely responsible for overseeing climate change policy. Rather alarmingly, the person with that task is actually the Undersecretary of the same department. The incredibly named Rebecca Powell aims to punch global warming square in the dick. Her portfolio of work covers, quote, the domestic natural environment, climate change adaptation, land use and floods and water, which is only slightly sullied by her support of HS2 and its damage to ancient woodlands. And she also joins a long list of MPs who have fiddled their expenses. And because we pay them, she's fiddled us. Anyway, the point I'm going to make is that we seem to be in a phase of protesting that targets governments and corporations rather than the individuals who have the means to enact change. Now, and to be fair, the media called George Eustice George Useless because he has a long list of embarrassments as an elected official. Mr. Useless signed a letter calling for tougher regulations on the press on the grounds that he had previously been the subject of negative media coverage. During the pandemic, when Britain was allowing people back into pubs, but only under strict rules that meant you had to get a certain size meal to qualify to drink alcohol in said pubs. Yes, really, rest of the world, that did happen. During that time, Mr. Useless chimed in by advising pubs to serve people a Scotch egg, as it was seen as a substantial meal, thus instantly making a mockery of the rules and of himself, and not just because Scotch eggs are hardly a staple of pub menus. And so Mr. Useless's food suggestion there made me think of a food-based bit of fictional journalism from the BBC's excellent satire The Thick of It in 2005, when an under-fire minister, Nicola Murray, was followed about by a chap dressed as a cut of meat who repeatedly asked her if she would resign by saying the words, "Are you getting the chop?" A bit of glorious pun work there, which resulted in some great swearing, of course, by Malcolm Tucker, as per usual. And with all that in mind, I have a silly suggestion that, for legal reasons, should never be used by climate protesters ever. For legal reasons, George Useless could, theoretically, be followed around by a chap dressed as a Scotch egg, complete with a tartan tam o' shanter and a ginger hair ensemble, to remind Useless of the negative effects of climate change, or say to quiz him on government policy to try and trip him up, or I don't know, to try and push for new ways to combat the climate crisis. Basically what I'm saying is potentially that person dressed as a Scotch egg could spend a very long time hanging around and constantly bugging George Useless, to make a substantial meal of the whole thing is what I'm saying. Perhaps the Scotch egg could shout something like, "Have you got a lot on your plate, George?" Now, it was well publicised a year or two ago, before the pandemic, about how much plastic we use. There was the Blue Planet episode where we saw plastic floating in the ocean. Animals die from it all the time. Microplastics are now in every part of society. It's pretty tragic all round. But one thing that hasn't changed, in my opinion, and I'm sure nobody can disagree with me here, is the amount of plastic packaging in supermarkets. We were told again and again and again they were going to reduce the amount of packaging, and all that's really happened is they got rid of those little sort of tiny plastic bags that you put fruit in, loose fruit, and just put that loose fruit in the plastic packaging. They took grapes from a punnet and they put it in plastic packaging. They've taken kiwi fruit, which is loose, and put it in plastic packaging, and so on and so forth. I would argue that it seems like there's more plastic packaging than ever before in supermarkets. And of course, I cannot endorse any form of protest related to this. But what I would do, if I was part of Extinction Rebellion, is I would take one person's plastic that they buy from a supermarket, because I don't know about you, but I can fill up one of those recycle boxes that you give to the council, probably up to about 2 of them per week. That's a lot of plastic for one person. You take one person's plastic, multiply it by 10, 20, 50, 100, 1,000 people, and you've got lorries worth of plastic. And what I would do if I was part of an activist group, which I'm not, and I do not endorse the following thing I'm about to say, I would take 1,000 people's worth of plastic, and I would get those 1,000 people's worth of plastic happening across the country. I'd take that plastic to either one or two places. You go to a supermarket and you dump it outside the entrance of said supermarket and have a protest because of that. You'd have to literally make people wade through the rubbish that supermarkets produce in order to go and buy some more rubbish that supermarkets produce. Of course, critics would say something like, these are environmentalists littering. That doesn't sound quite right, does it? What a bunch of hypocrites. So this idea ultimately is flawed, and it becomes very illegal indeed when I suggest that maybe you could take all of that plastic that you've accumulated and dump it in the garden of one of the bosses of the supermarkets and then have a protest. I do not endorse or encourage any of the words that I'm saying in this video. Okay? Number 6, HS2. There have been many protests, understandably, about the destruction that the high-speed rail network is making across parts of the UK. Ancient forests and woodlands are being torn up. We're told trees are being planted elsewhere, but you don't need to tear out the forest in the first place. In fact, the Daily Express even went one stage further and attacked HS2 from a different angle, which I'm amazed that protesters haven't used the same tactic themselves. Because as I mentioned earlier, by instead of saying crops will fail, you'll have no booze, there is a similar tactic you can use with HS2. Fortunately, saying, oh, the environmental damage is awful, is working, but not good enough. So there is another way of going around it. Let's have a look at that Express headline. HS2 shock, Boris Johnson's high-speed rail project to cost you a staggering £3,376. Revealed! Okay guys, this one is simple. You focus a criticism on the train line only being accessible to the people who live or work in the cities and towns that are along the proposed HS2 route. And then you simply ask the question, why does everybody have to pay almost £4,000 and rising for a project we cannot use ourselves and that already has been delayed by 7 years? Oh, and look how much damage it's done to the environment too. That's how you slide the topic in there, through the back door. The seventh and eighth suggestion is largely based around the idea of Lent. Now, obviously, I'm not the first person to say people who want to try and reduce the impact of climate change should give up certain things. But the transition isn't always as easy as it sounds. I tried giving up meat, at least reducing it massively this year for a couple of months, and I succeeded. Well, we know that the agriculture industry produces very huge amounts of emissions. We're told that that's 3.4% of all emissions that contribute to climate change is from dairy. And worryingly, that is greater than aviation and road transport emissions combined. So, like I say, I tried to give up meat earlier this year, but what I thought was even harder to do was to give up milk. I knew so very little about the alternatives to milk, but obviously still need some kind of milk in my life, in my coffees and cereals and so forth, that I was very hesitant indeed. What I did was I spent quite a lot of money buying the, 1 or 2 litre sized soy milk, which was disgusting. I tried almond milk, which was not great taste-wise, and then I realised just how much water is involved in making almond milk. It really isn't that environmentally friendly at all. And then I tried oat milk, and oh my god, it changed my life. It's absolutely delicious in most forms, and I can have it in my coffee, and I have it on cereal, and I even found a chocolate-based version to put on my Weetabix. Yum, 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 yum. And I honestly will never ever go back to regular milk, unless of course what happened recently, which is when I ran out of oat milk, and they also were out of stock of it in the supermarket. So I then did buy an actual regular latte from Costa, and then I did buy a 2-pint regular semi-skim milk, but it was just a one-off, honestly. And the thing is, I don't think a lot of people know how delicious oat milk is, which is one of the most environmentally friendly alternatives to milk. So I'm sure activists will eventually have to start protesting cow milk factories, distribution centres and so forth, when really there's something else that they should do, and they should try and push the use of these different types of milks, the more environmentally friendly versions, of course. And one way to do that is quite simple in my eyes, right? You know those little small packets of milk you get in hotels, that enough for 1 cup? Sometimes you need a few of them for a cup if you're me, but those little tiny sachets of milk, why don't they make small ones like that, maybe slightly bigger, sample size packets of alternative milks? It would have saved me a lot of money and time if I had access to a sample pack of all these different types of milk. Plus, I never got round to sampling rice milk, cashew milk and so forth, because I found oat milk and just stuck with it. I wonder if the other ones are any good. I'm never going to buy them because I'm poor and I have to stick with what I buy regularly in the supermarket. But what I can afford is to get some sample packs of milk, but that is not a thing that exists. And when you think that a lot of these alternative milks are also UHT milks and can be stored on a shelf for a long time, why on earth aren't they doing sample milks and attracting more people from milk that isn't from a cow? I want to talk about public transport. Now, obvious statement alert, but buses are relatively affordable in places like city centres and towns, but they often are rammed full of people too. So, services obviously need to increase without prices increasing too. The demand is clearly there for public transport, and it will only increase further and further if you have good schemes available to encourage people to use more public transport. But how do you do that when trains in particular have not been affordable in the UK for decades? Even advanced train fares are still way more expensive than they should be. How do you get people out of their cars and onto public transport? The answer is in fact simple, but also will be a right pain in the arse to implement. You simply subsidise people's travel costs. So regular folk can get an allowance of say 10 journeys, 20 journeys, 50, a year's worth of journeys at a huge discount. In sort of the same way that kids and old age pensioners right now can travel either for free or rather cheaply on the bus. In the future, regular adults can pay, say, the full price of their fare and then get a percentage of it back, ideally 50% or more, to really encourage them to use public transport. On the flip side, people who fly the most and who are responsible for the greatest amounts of emissions via transport are rich people. They can afford regular business trips in the air, short-haul flights and extra holidays on the other side of the world. To put it another way, they are frequent flyers. People have been calling for a carbon tax in some form for years, and an extra cost for the well-off to pay whilst flying is the way to do it. In the same way that cigarettes are expensive here in the UK because they are A, damaging, and B, the idea is that some of the cost of the cigarettes goes to pay towards cancer research or treatment. And then similarly, the congestion charge is there because driving and emissions are damaging and the cost of it goes towards some better things. So logically, a flying tax, because flying is damaging, should also follow the same rules. On top of that, regular folk, as in non-rich folk, who also avoid flying to go on holiday, for example, should get a bonus paid to their public transport scheme, or alternatively get money off different holidays that do not involve flying. For example, if you were to travel from King's Cross in London on the Eurostar to France or Belgium, at the moment it's not exactly cheap, but if someone was to offer you 50% off to go on the train rather than flying, what would you do? You have to face it, you're never going to get the rich to pay a higher tax rate under any circumstances whatsoever. There's been a pandemic and that won't get rich people to pay their way. Brexit has increased costs in the UK and nothing will be done about that in regards to higher taxes, and so on and so forth. Higher taxes are just going to be written off as socialism and ignored by the people who make the rules. But the caveat is you might just be able to get rich people to pay higher taxes on specific items or services such as flights, in the same way that you pay more for cigarettes and to drive into city centres. So groups like Extinction Rebellion need to target rail companies like Railtrack, like Mark Thomas did earlier on in the video, and expose the funding that these giants get, how their budgets are spent poorly, and explore how we are being ripped off by the train lines. And they need to do all of this whilst not disrupting people's travel in any way, especially on services that are considered to be more environmentally friendly than driving or flying. And of course, you need to protest the airlines, the airports, aviation in general, which of course legally I do not endorse. Also, for once, I do not have an idea, a stunt of how to pull off this particular type of protest. The best I could come up with was the fact that children have been a very effective way of getting the climate message across via school strikes and via protests and demonstrations. So all I've got on this one is an airline like Virgin being protested by a bunch of virgins. The penultimate suggestion I'm going to put across here is the most effective one, potentially, if it's done right. It's very similar to, oh my god, if crops fail, we're going to run out of beer suggestion. It's very similar to my HS2 idea of, instead of highlighting the environmental impact of the high-speed rail network, you say to people, this is how much you are paying for the thing we don't need. So, for my penultimate suggestion, I once again have to say, know your audience. It's something that environmental activists time and time again get wrong. You have to know your audience. And what do the audience in the UK know? We have just had this thing called Brexit. And sadly, a lot of people voted for Brexit because they don't like immigrants. A lot of them wanted a lot of Eastern Europeans to just get out of the country. They wanted British people to have British jobs and so forth. I mean, clearly, it's not worked out how they liked because all of our shelves are empty and there's no one to drive our trucks. But I'm trying to not make this too political. What I'm saying is that people in this country, whether you like it or not, there's no way to sugarcoat this, have a deep-seated hatred of people from outside of this country. So, know your audience. You know that they're scared of this particular thing, so use that to your advantage. It's abundantly clear that as the world heats up, people will migrate from one part of the world to another. It's very easy to argue that all these migrants will eventually go to the big cities in the Western world. Very similar to when Syria had an exodus of refugees coming into Europe. There were people who were very scared by the images of people en masse crossing by foot across a huge continent. And what you've got to make people aware is this is going to happen more regularly and in greater numbers. By using facts and statistics, you can show them using numbers how bad it's going to get, and then you can demonstrate how bad it's going to get. And any suggestion I'll make in the next few seconds is just purely for entertainment purposes for this video. But We've seen how Extinction Rebellion can shut down somewhere like Oxford Street, the shopping district in London, for a couple of days. I'm just saying that if you mocked up a scenario of migrants invading an area, then maybe it might make a few headlines and make people aware of the situation. How to do that is more difficult than simply the idea itself. I think that if I was in the position of an activist, I would certainly get a lot of people involved, dress them in sort of migrant style clothing, maybe a fair amount of rags, make them look quite dirty, and maybe cover their faces in shawls or maybe religious attire, because that's another thing that people are scared of in this country for some reason. And you get lots and lots of people involved, shitloads of people involved. And whilst you're doing that, you could also bring along some, let's say, very heavy lead mannequins, some statues, some kind of human shaped objects which are almost immovable, especially if they have, say, a concrete base, and you deliver them on a big truck which has a big winch that can put them in certain areas and make them hard to move. And so basically, when there isn't a real human dressed as a migrant, there is a fake human dressed as a migrant taking up some space and being even harder to move than an actual human. I wouldn't endorse saying that an area such as Bank in London, if that entire area around the tube station was filled up with people and heavy to move statues dressed as migrants, possibly fenced in, because you have to put these migrants somewhere and it's normally behind a fence. That fence could double up as protection for the migrants, both real and fake, from members of the public who might be angered by their protest. And these little camps, let's call them, can have lots of banners around them, set up very easily, maybe speaker systems, big screens, maybe some images can be projected onto the buildings behind them by organisations such as the activist organisation led by donkeys that I mentioned earlier. Maybe take a different route and have all these fake migrants gathered together safely and then have a massive rave for days and days and days on end. With the idea being, yes, these fake migrants are quite distracting and do make a lot of fuss and a lot of noise, but is that better or worse than there being a real invasion of people because of climate change? Yes, I know, using far-right terms like invasion probably are not a good idea, but it's just getting my point across in this video. Do you understand? And my final suggestion ties in with all of that at the same time, because you remember about 40 years ago, roughly, there were famines in Africa. And the problem with climate change is not just migrants moving from one place to another, but also there's a real threat of famine as well. So that can be incorporated in the protests that I just mentioned. And what's the best way to highlight things like famine? Well, it's to have another Live Aid, isn't it? So what I'm suggesting, and when I do not endorse this suggestion for legal reasons, is that around these migrant areas, or perhaps in a big park such as Hyde Park, one day you come along with a sound system or systems that are so powerful, and using a suggestion from earlier on, not just having celebrities involved, but actual proper bands that people have heard of, proper bands that will get a lot of attention and put on a kind of Live Aid show for the migrants that you've just set up in a certain part of, say, London, or just for the idea of there being migrants and famine in the future. Put on the show. It will be televised, hopefully, and get the awareness across that way. Now, obviously, that is an idea that you can actually do legally. You can actually literally put on a concert for a hypothetical event that's going to happen in the future. I say hypothetical, it's definitely going to happen if climate change gets worse. During that particular concert, you can raise money for your own organisation so that you can protest even more in the future without worrying about funds running out. And because it's such a good cause, like Live Aid, I'm pretty sure you can get a lot of these big bands to perform for free. Before we finish the video, here is the penultimate Mark Thomas clip and the final Matt Winning clip as well. See me after this to say goodbye and to show you some important information about the guys we've seen today in this video. Thank you for watching that video about 10 different ways to combat the climate crisis. I hope it was enlightening. I hope it gave you some ideas, although legally not too many ideas, obviously. And just to let you know, this is a very tiny channel that you're watching now. You might be a regular subscriber, you might be brand new to this channel. A lot of the videos I make are satirical about general arseholes on the internet. I've got a whole playlist called Gammon Box to give you some idea of the type of stuff I make. And I have spent 3 weeks writing, recording, editing and promoting a various amount of climate-based videos on this channel, which normally doesn't cover topics like that. But this is a very small channel with a very small reach, and a lot of work has gone into the recent videos I've made. So I'm simply going to ask you now, if you've enjoyed this content, then please consider donating $1 or $2 or £1 or £2 of your hard-earned cash to me, just to say thanks for the video and maybe encourage me to make more stuff in the future. If you can just drop a very small amount of cash into my PayPal account, links are below and at the end of the video they'll be flashing up on your screen, and I'll be very grateful indeed. Alternatively, you can pop $1 or $2 in my Patreon, which you get charged once a month, and that's a good way of getting some extra bonus content. Alternatively, you could buy me a coffee via Ko-Fi. Think of it as buying me a pint, albeit a pint of lager that still tastes nice. Other than that, thank you very much for watching. Please spread this video around on social networks, no matter which one you use. Please like and please subscribe, and hopefully I'll see you again in the future. Cheers.